brightly.
Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on transitioning from paper to CMMS. I'm Alexandra Altvader. I am the Manufacturing Marketing Manager here at Dude Solutions. And I'm just going to quickly go over some housekeeping rules, and then I will pass it over to Dwayne. So first and foremost, all of your phones are muted. So if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box or in the questions box throughout, and we will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. We'll make sure to keep the webinar to under an hour, including questions. If we run out of time, we'll answer those questions individually. And the most common asked question is, will you receive a recording? Yes, you will. You'll have a recording of this webinar within 24 hours, probably by the end of the day. So no worries about that, and you can pass it on to your colleagues. And so without further ado, I want to present Dwayne Divers to you. He has spent over 20 years managing and implementing asset management solutions for manufacturing, and we're really excited to have him today here to share his expertise. So without further ado, here's Dwayne.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Looking forward to spending a little bit of time with you this morning to discuss some of the benefits and things to think about as you make a transition from paper into a CMMS system. Going to talk about the goal of the implementation, a little bit about what CMMS stands for and the technologies that are available, 5 things to consider as you're making this transition, and then finally go over some of the benefits that you will gain as you start to automate your business processes around maintenance operations. So I always like to start out any presentation that I do, both internally and externally in the organization, about what is the goal as far as with maintenance operations in the manufacturing sector. And that is to maximize overall equipment effectiveness. This really has 3 components that are used to calculate and manage that, and it becomes important of why CMMS can help you gain an advantage and improvement here. One is availability. So basically this is equipment uptime, and it's a calculation as you can see on the screen. The second thing, and I think it's one of the things that people overlook because there's a lot of documentation out there about equipment uptime and availability, but also an important key to maximizing OEE is making sure that you have a performance efficiency, and that is that the machines that you have purchased or designed and installed are running up to those design specifications. Because while you definitely need them available and up, you also need them running at maximum efficiency to gain the value of your investment. And then finally, I think everybody understands that quality is one of the most important things in manufacturing, and making it right the first time is always important. So measuring your rate of quality products is another key component and something that can be managed with a CMMS. So what does CMMS stand for? It stands for Computerized Maintenance Management System. You may also hear EAMS, which is an Enterprise Asset Management System. Might hear Work Order Management System and so forth. But generally speaking, all of those fall into the general term CMMS. It's an online or on-premise, meaning that this is something that you can get through the cloud, you can get through a SaaS provider, software as a service, or you could actually buy and install on-site at your location. And it's used to manage work orders, equipment, and MRO inventory, and it's used to automate and collect the work orders and the detailed information and the resources utilized to complete them. These resources are your technicians and your operators, or your people, your inventory, and then also the tools that you may need to use to perform your maintenance operations. The nice thing about the technology today, and having been in this space for 20 years, one of the things that has become a big benefit of a CMMS is that you can still access it through a PC, but also the proliferation of tablets and mobile devices have become a very effective and efficient way to access information, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We really want to look at 5 things to consider as you start to decide whether or not you're going to make this move from a paper or an Excel spreadsheet work order system into a CMMS. You want to look at what your implementation team, this is going to be one of the important factors to make sure that you have key people involved in this process. Data, obviously very important. If you have it, whether it's in a spreadsheet or in another system of something, getting that data is important. Understanding the resources that you're going to be utilizing, that will be utilizing the application. Getting them the training necessary so they can effectively and efficiently get up to speed and running on an application. And finally, you want to look at the codification of the data so that at the end, one of the big things that you're going to get out of here are insights into how you can improve operations. And by having a proper codification system, that's going to help automate that. So first, the implementation team. Usually when you're talking about either a small or medium-sized operation facility, you want to engage your maintenance manager, probably a lead technician or planner and scheduler, and an operations manager, so that the people who have stakes in this all have a say into how things are going to be implemented. I would recommend for small to medium-sized businesses to keep this team small. About 2 to 3 people are usually the right size. The implementation team will have knowledge about your current operations and where they would like to see improvements. And they can help make sure that you're going to have consistency in your data definition. Understanding how you want to set up your equipment, how you want to set up the equipment hierarchy. Those types of decisions are going to be made by this team. They also will understand how they want to manage the operations and how they want the workflow to progress. So who's going to make the work order request? Who's going to approve that request if it's necessary, or is it going to go directly to the technician? Who's going to be responsible for closing the work order, and who may be doing a quality assurance check on that work order? Those types of decisions are going to have to be made as you do your implementation, and this implementation team can help in doing that. It's important that they understand the business processes around manufacturing and maintenance, and that's why you want to have a combination of both maintenance and operations if possible. And you need them to be able to define the workflows and analyze any key maintenance data like downtime and reasons for equipment failure, and have insights into that as they start to do the planning phase of implementing a CMMS solution. Now, the next thing this team will have to look at is the data. So, usually when I'm out on site and I'm helping a customer implement a solution, I'll bring together the implementation team, and really the first thing after we talk about some general workflow issues, approvals and things like that, who's going to be making requests, who's going to be completing, are you going to be using tablets or mobile devices. Then we get deep into what data do you have today, and how would you like that organized to best meet the needs of the information that you want to put into the system as well as get out. So again, one of the keys are that the CMMS relies on the appropriate and detailed equipment and inventory data to be successful. This data often you might find in spreadsheets. You may have spreadsheets that define this today, or you may have some of this information in other production systems that you've implemented in the past. And you may be able to pull out data like equipment IDs and descriptions, what the serial or model numbers are, and things like that. One thing to keep in mind is that perfect and complete data is not going to be realistic in the initial phase of the implementation. If you get caught up too much on trying to make sure everything is 100% complete and 100% accurate, then you're never going to start to reap the benefits and understand how to use the application. Today, with the capabilities of the applications that are out there in the market, you can use mobile devices to go out and either validate or update information about your equipment real time. So if you have the time or if you have the data, it's always great. But if you don't, it's good to set out a high-level structure and then build off of that as you start to use the application. Define the hierarchy is very important. Equipment hierarchy is important depending on whether or not you are a process-oriented and a process line-oriented organization, or whether or not you're more batch-oriented, and you may need to set your information up to either have a production line as the top level of your hierarchy, or whether or not you have discrete machine centers that are a part of a department that you may want to have that equipment associated to for roll-up purposes. When you're starting to define your equipment hierarchy, another thing to think about is you probably want to get down to the machine center level. So that would be a printing press or a filler or an extruder or a wrapper. These are major machine centers within a process line or within a department for batch processing. But then you want to make sure that in the initial phase, that may be the perfect level for you to start at, unless you have a lot of detailed information already. Then, once you have started using the application, you can always continue to drill down and build out the hierarchy down to the component level. So if you're talking about a conveying system, you may put a conveyor in, but then you may want to, after you start using the application, actually have all the motors that are associated with each section of that conveyor. But you have to balance, again, what's the most effective use of your time and resources so that you can get up and start understanding where you're spending your money, where you're spending your, allocating your time and inventory, and so that you can start to make good decisions. Then you can always drill down deeper as you can start to use and become more comfortable with the application. When you're looking at equipment, it's good to focus on the ID, the description, the type of equipment that it is. These are all going to be important for finding something and also reporting on it. You want to look at criticality so that you can understand where you need to, what the priority of something is that you need to correct. And then after you've defined those 4 pieces of information, if you have the time, or this is again something that you can do in the second phase as you go and collect information, you can get things like the manufacturer and the serial number, model number, when it was installed, and other specific boilerplate information like in the case of a motor, a frame type, and the horsepower, and so forth. In inventory, you want to make sure that you can, at a minimum, collect and define your ID for that inventory item, a description of what it is, and usually we'll talk to you about how you can build out the description so it's consistent and easy to find things. You may want to type your inventory so that you have the list of electrical equipment inventory items, and the list of mechanical, or you may want to get down into motors and so forth. So you may want to type it for finding it or grouping it together. You probably at least want to have the supplier price, where you can find it, or the bin location, and the quantity on hand. Those are good starting points. Once you start using the application, then you may want to go back, and after you've gotten some detailed information about how you're using those parts, you may want to set min-maxes and supplier details like lead times and what the supplier part number is. Again, these are things that you could do up front, but in the essence of time and consideration of time, it's good to go ahead and get the key pieces of information in there, start using, and then build out as you get more comfortable with the applications. Another thing a lot of people go to a CMMS for is so that they can start to generate PM schedules and have a system tell them when they need to go and perform that preventive and predictive maintenance routines on those equipment. And to do that, make sure, again, you prioritize how you're putting the PM schedules in. Start with the shorter frequency PMs, like weekly and monthly PMs, to make sure you're covering the immediate needs, and then expand out to quarterly and semi-annual and annual PMs as you have more experience using the application. You want to focus, when you're talking about the PMs, obviously focus on critical equipment first and define instructions including lockout, tagout procedures and the required personal protective equipment, PPE, so that in today, when you're starting to utilize a lot of mobile and tablet technology, all these instruction lists are very useful in being able to check so that the technician, as he's doing the work, can check off and say, yes, I've observed my PPE requirements, or I have performed the lockout and tagout procedures. So in doing all that, it can make for an effective implementation of the system. Next thing, think about the resources that are going to be utilizing the application. The technicians, potentially maybe operators, if you have an operation where the operators are doing some of the maintenance or are doing inspections on the equipment that you would like to track, and the management team. And the first thing is consider the technology capabilities of the team. You know, we'll have a mix of people out there that may have never used a PC or a tablet before. Because of the pervasiveness of the technology today, though, especially with the younger and the new resources to the market, those technicians and operators that are early in their careers should face very minimum risk of adoption. But you absolutely need to keep in mind your knowledge-rich resources who may not have a high level of comfort with technology. They may not have smartphones, and they may not have tablets like that everybody is using today. And so they may be intimidated a little bit by this. So one of the things to think about is maybe an introduction to computers and technologies course, 101 is a prudent investment before you even introduce the concepts of what you're doing with CMMS training. So get them comfortable on, hey, how do I log into a PC? How do I open up a tablet and get to a web page? Things like that can go a long way to getting them comfortable and getting a high adoption rate once you get into your implementation of the CMMS. Next, the training to use the CMMS itself. It's absolutely critical to the consistency, and consistency is important for good data quality. And I'm sure you've heard this a million times, but everybody will say it in implementing a application, a computer application. If you're putting garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So while managing your workflow is a key goal of implementing a CMMS and being reminded of when you need to do that work, or being used as a communication medium for communicating what needs to be done and what has been done, more important or as important as all of that is being able to get key insights out of what you're doing, where you're spending your time. And to be able to do that, you have to make sure that the people who are utilizing the system are effectively and efficiently putting good data in. You want to make sure you're training all of the users, the entire team, managers, planners and schedulers, lead technicians, the technicians themselves, and operators. These don't have to be long classes. If your business processes are set out correctly, then these could be half-hour, one-hour trainings. They're really just introductions to the application and the business processes. Most likely, unless you're talking about a planner and scheduler or a maintenance manager or somebody that's going to be an administrator in the application, a good one-hour session, hands-on session for that person can go a long ways for them getting comfortable using the application. In my case, I always like to, especially when I get down to the end users of the applications, these are the technicians, the requesters that are going to be in there every day. I like to get a conference room or a training room, and I'll have a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse, and I'll just pass that around the room and let people create a work order, close a work order, and I'll help them through that process. But it gives them the experience of this is how I use the application, and everybody sitting around the room can gain from that. I've seen that be a very effective way to train, especially end users. Give a quick demo and then let them do in the system so that you can show and reinforce what they're doing. Another important thing is I like to leave behind very straightforward, step-by-step instruction guides. These could be 1 to 2 page or front and back of a laminated sheet of paper, or they could be a multi-page document. Both of these can be, taped up to a workstation, or they could be laminated and handed out to the individuals so they can carry them around as they're doing their work. And I usually try to include screenshots along with step-by-step instructions on how they're supposed to do the basic and straightforward things of the application, like creating a work order, closing a work order, booking my labor, recording my labor hours, issuing a part to a work order. So these simple things that may be a little bit intimidating when you're first using it, if you have these guides, it can be really good reinforcement and get them very comfortable in using the application. Next, and last but not least, we want to talk about codification. So this is important to understand on, again, like I said, the application is an application can be very good to help you manage your day-to-day workflow. So taking a request of a breakdown or a process improvement request on something that needs to be corrected, recording that so that information can then be transmitted and acted upon. Or having a system that can generate a work order from a PM schedule so that you know that you need to go out and do that PM, every week or every month, and being, having that come to you and you understanding that. But after all of that, after you've done all that, after you've closed those work orders out, it's important that you've used codes in the closing process and you've used codes attached to the equipment that are industry standards that will allow you then to get reports out of the application about where you're spending your time. Most likely, if you're moving from a paper-based system or an Excel-based system and you're moving to a CMMS, one of the things that you want to try to accomplish is that you probably have a high amount of reactive maintenance that you're doing, and you would like to move to a more proactive maintenance strategy where you're doing more PMs, more predictive maintenance, more scheduled corrective, and not always reacting to the emergency of the hour. To do that, you have to understand where do you need to adjust what you're doing, and the best way to do that is through codification. So what you need to do is first choose to define your equipment at either the machine center or down to the component level, and that make sure that it has equipment types. Okay, types could be a motor, a pump. It could be machine centers, like I said before, fillers, conveyors, extruders, wrappers. Again, you're going to start probably at the higher level, and then as you get more use out of the application and more comfortable with it, you'll probably start to drive down to your component level. Now, I will say that I usually recommend for people, most PMs are going to be written at the machine center level. They're usually not written all the way down to the component level. Those components will be addressed during a machine center preventive maintenance task. But one of the benefits after you start using the application is you may find a corrective measure that has to be taken into account when you're out doing your preventive maintenance. And that corrective work order, you may want to start drilling down into the component level, whether it was the motor, whether it was the pump. And if you want to do that, again, that could be a second step in your implementation process, and that's where you can get into doing the types for that. Next thing that's very important, we talked about it a little bit before when we were talking about the data, is that you want to list criticality for each piece of equipment. Now, you may not be able to get all, depending on how many pieces of equipment you have, you may not be able to get to all of it in the first phase, but what you want to do is make sure that, one, you've defined a scale that you want to follow, and secondly, that you've at least identified the critical pieces of equipment that you're trying to maintain. Now, I have seen in the market a 1 to 4 scale as a simple scale, or I've seen scales go from 1 to 10, and it really depends on how thorough you want to be and how much of a differentiation you want to have in your planning and scheduling process. Most of my small to medium-sized businesses, I recommend the 1 to 4 scale. And when I have a 1 to 4 scale, 1 would be your safety and environmental equipment, things that absolutely cannot fail or that you have to have mitigation procedures in place if they do. Second, number 2 would be immediate production impact. So basically anything that would cause a process outage. 3 would be an emergency backup and redundant system. And 4 would be no immediate impact to production, safety, or environmental. So that's a very simple 1 to 4 system that you could implement for equipment criticality that can gain a lot of benefit out of prioritizing what work orders you should be focused on a daily basis. When you move into the work order codification, you should look at work order types. This is going to be important for you being able to understand where you're spending your resources, and it will also show you whether or not you're meeting the goals for the right mix of reactive, corrective, preventive, and predictive maintenance activities. So work order types at the simplest would be, breakdown maintenance, corrective maintenance, meaning things that are found from other activities, most likely that could be scheduled as opposed to causing an immediate failure. Preventive maintenance and predictive maintenance schedules that are being used. The reason I usually tell people to break those two, they are two different techniques, and while they're both proactive maintenance, it's sometimes important to understand how much preventive, which is basically restorative type work, versus how much predictive, where you're doing on-condition maintenance activities to find things that are in a failing state so that you can correct them before there's operational consequences. The other thing, just like where you have criticality with equipment, you also have to be able to understand how important the work order is and what the priority of the work order is. So again, I like a scale from 1 to 4, where 4 is emergency, or where 1 is emergency, 2 is a high priority, which means that it has to be addressed within 24 hours. Medium, or 3 is a medium priority, which is less than a week, and then low, meaning when you can get to it. Again, people have made scales that are different than that, or more thorough than that, but the 1 to 4 is a good place to start, and you can always expand out later if you wish. The last thing I'd like to talk about is failure codes. Very important in the manufacturing vertical, and that you have work order failure codes. It's very important so that you can understand and prioritize where to focus your improvement efforts. So that's the key. So everybody, again, you're going to fix something when it breaks. And you're going to have an idea in your mind, what your major problems are. But there's nothing better than a graph that's going to show you exactly how many of this type of failure you're having in your operations for this type of equipment on these types of process lines. That's where you can really start to get a lot of advantage out of using the CMMS. I like to go with a standard list of failure codes, especially with people moving from a paper-based system into a CMMS. And those are going to be examples of like accidental damage, equipment wear, alignment issues, improper installation, and the oldie but the goodie, operator error. I know a lot of people are going to use that one. But those will help you, as those are just a few of the examples that we recommend when we do our implementations, in that these are things that are basic general failure reasons that start to get you analyzing the data. Now, once you have become more advanced in using the CMMS, you may extend the list of failure reasons, and you may go into a complete FMEA analysis and look at the causes and the actions taken. But in the first stages, it's always good to at least get those failure codes in there. So now that you've kind of heard the reasons of things to consider, what kind of benefits are we going to get out of implementing a CMMS? I think that's probably important to at least spend a little bit of time on. So we want to, some of the benefits of here is that, as I've said before, you can move towards the implementation of a proactive maintenance strategy. A lot of sites that I go to that are basically in a reactive mode, they don't have any system today. They have a lot of PMs up in their head, but they're only do them when they remember to do them. And so they have a high amount of breakdown and emergency work, and that's obviously a very inefficient way to run a maintenance operation. So moving to a proactive maintenance strategy is important. You can maximize employee effectiveness and efficiency. So again, we look at the goal of being OEE, and that's obviously focused on the equipment and the processes and your production output. But also a CMMS can ensure that by moving to that proactive, now you have better planning of the resources that you need, whether those be people or inventory or the tools. You can manage MRO costs better, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Understand equipment failure. We've talked a little bit about that. And then as the goal, we can increase overall equipment effectiveness. So what is a proactive maintenance strategy? Again, it's moving from being what I would call breakdown or emergency maintenance, waiting until the equipment fails, it shuts down your production process, and then you react to it. That is a very simple methodology and way to run maintenance operations. It's just not very effective, and it doesn't lead to a maximizing of overall equipment effectiveness. So the CMMS can help you start to implement preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance, and then as a consequence of doing those, what I will call corrective maintenance. So you're never going to avoid everything in your operations from failing, right? You're going to do some things that have the certain failure methods are going to be, you'll be able to do preventive maintenance where you're going out and you're rebuilding something, or you're changing the oil, or you're changing some of the parts and doing an overhaul. That's preventive maintenance, and you're doing that on a fixed schedule. More likely than not, you're probably doing some types of predictive maintenance, and these could be oil analysis or thermography or vibration analysis. And what you're really doing there is you're going out and inspecting the equipment and observing the equipment to find out whether or not it's starting to tell you that it's about to fail. that gives you time to then plan to go out and do that restorative type maintenance. So if you can do a vibration analysis and you can tell there's a misalignment, you may be able to schedule the realignment of that equipment during off-production hours, thus maximizing the overall equipment effectiveness. So that's where you can start to get the benefits of a proactive maintenance strategy. So what you can do, again, with the codification is I'll see, how much reactive maintenance I've been doing, and then as I add in additional preventive and predictive maintenance and the corrective maintenance that comes from those, we'll see whether or not we start to get improvements in, a reduction in reactive, but also an improvement in overall equipment effectiveness. Another benefit of implementing a CMMS is being able to maximize your employee effectiveness and efficiency. I talked a little bit about tablets and mobile devices before. And one of the things that in today's technology, again, this has been an evolution over the last 20 years, we're implementing systems where people are using tablets and walking around the facilities and actually doing their work on the tablet. Now, this could be as simple as them being able to then look at the instructions of what they're doing and checking those off, and then booking their time or recording their labor and recording the parts that they're using. So there's efficiencies gains in there, but one of the things that we've seen people get real excited about is while I'm on the piece of equipment, I can pull up the entire history of what's been done to that. So I can maybe understand why we're having this problem or see what somebody has done in the past to correct the issue that I'm seeing. Another really interesting thing is you can tie in equipment reference documentation. So this gets really interesting. I started demonstrating this solely as, hey, I can put in a wiring diagram or an exploded parts view. But one of the things that I've seen as I've used mobile technology, the simple thing of correcting an issue with a bicycle. You can go on YouTube and say, hey, how do I replace a front derailleur on a bicycle? And immediately you can get a video showing you exactly how to do that. So with utilizing tablets, you have that capability, and I can actually tie those videos that you may have on your personal media network so that that resource could look at how they do a certain procedure while they're sitting at the machine. Obviously, you can also take pictures and have as is and as left. So there's a lot of benefit that you can get out of the new technologies that CMMS have today that'll be able to give you high efficiency in your workforce. Another thing that they may be able to do is if you're implementing your inventory module along with your work and equipment modules, they may be able to look at part availability while they're doing the work before they make that trip over to the inventory warehouse to find the part that they need. You can manage MRO cost better with the CMMS system. So again, while we talked about in the first phases of implementing, you may want to get in just the key pieces of information. One of the things that you'll have a better handle on is being able to increase the service level once you've started to understand the usage patterns of the MRO materials that you need to keep in store. Service level being when somebody comes and asks for a part, that you have it in stock and you can give it to them so that they can go and correct the issue that they're trying to correct. Or when it's time to do that PM, understanding ahead of time that you need what you need so that you can have it in stock and order effectively. You can reduce carrying costs, meaning that I can optimize my quantity on hand relative to the demand that I have, because I'd be able to see in the system what's coming up that's needed or what the usage patterns have been in the past, and tie that in with supplier availability or lead time so that I know when I need to order stuff and make sure that I'm not having extra material on hand. Also, depending on whether or not you're using it across multiple sites within an organization, obviously a CMMS can help provide visibility into sister plants that might have that part that you can get, and you don't have to store as many or you don't have to buy as many critical parts, and you can share them across the organization. And finally, by becoming more proactive, by understanding what you need to keep, you'll minimize the cost of expedited shipments, and what that adds to your bottom line. Finally, you can understand equipment failure, so utilize failure codes to understand. And again, everyone knows that where the most pesky equipment is. You understand where the area of the plant that you're getting the most work orders from, but you may be missing the forest for the trees when you can't look at the detail of what's happening and understanding from the failure codes what is actually the most important issue. So when you're transitioning to proactive maintenance, you can use those failure codes to understand the most prevalent and, even more importantly, the most costly failures. Because just because something's the most pesky doesn't necessarily means it should be the one that you focus on first. But by looking at it and codifying and recording the cost against the work, now I can start, and recording downtime and downtime cost, now I can start to look at where do I need to focus my improvement efforts. Everyone has limited time. A CMMS can help you prioritize and get the most benefit out of that time. Now, I said lastly, but now this is lastly. Obviously, we want to improve and increase overall equipment effectiveness. Through moving to a CMMS and implementing a proactive maintenance strategy, you can improve equipment reliability and uptime, ensure equipment performance, and manage quality in your maintenance operations. Thanks for your time today. We're going to open it up for any questions that we may have.
So it looks like we've gotten a few questions in already. So the first question, Twain, is, does Dude Solutions offer tutorials for basic skill training?
Yes, we do. We actually have, our methodology of training is a quick start process to where we have personalized one-on-one instruction online for you to be able to call in. But we are also building out a LMS system that will allow tutorials so that you can do it at your own pace.
Great. And here's another great question. How many levels of coded detail are available for each work order? I think we'll look back coming in from the codification slide.
Okay. So I'm not exactly sure on the levels. So right now, within the Dude Solutions applications, you have the capability of recording downtime. You have the ability of recording downtime cost. You can define budget codes and project codes. And then we have one level of failure analysis, and we usually relegate that to the failure reason. And then, of course, you're going to have work order type and craft and those types of codifications that you can utilize all of that information to understand where you're spending your money in your maintenance operations.
Great. We just had another one come in. You mentioned phases of implementation. Given the functionality of existing software solutions, can you expand on typical phases of implementation? That's
a very good question. As I kind of alluded to during the presentation, and again, it'll depend on the size of the organization and what they're trying to accomplish. But most of our small and medium-sized business companies, which is the predominant ones that are moving from either an Excel spreadsheet or moving from a paper-based system, what we like to do is spend the first phase in understanding how your equipment is organized the best way. And again, like I was saying before, try to start with, am I going to do it as in a process line perspective? Am I going to do it from a batch department perspective? Set that up. Only go as deep as time allots. You can always go deeper. And then we try to at least get them up and running on their demand-based or corrective and breakdown maintenance, and get them introduced to some doing the close frequency PMs. So I would say phase one is always going to include a combination of defining equipment, getting an understanding of your work process to do corrective and demand-based work orders, and an introduction to starting to develop your PM schedules. Usually after you've worked on that, then we'll come back and start to talk about implementing inventory. Probably, as everyone knows, that's usually a lot more detailed information that you have to collect to make sure that you can effectively implement.
Thanks, Dwayne. And here's another one. What is the typical implementation timetable to get a small organization up and running?
So we have multiple solutions. Some people like to go at their own pace, and that's where we have what is called the quick start that allows them to be trained on using the application, and then they build the database out for themselves and start using it. We also offer a 1-week on-site where we can come out and help you understand your business processes, look at any data, help you collect data, and then start to use the application. For small and medium-sized businesses, usually within that first week, because we can get the focus of the individual by being on site, they're up and running with their most critical PMs, and they have a good equipment hierarchy set up and all of their technicians and resources trained.
Dwayne, how important is equipment hierarchy, and how different is it from codification?
So that's a good question. So equipment hierarchy gives you two things. The first thing that it's going to give you is an easy way for your requesters and your technicians to find the pieces of equipment that they're looking for. So as you start out, if you only have 1 or 2 levels, then maybe it's not quite as important as it will be as once you start to build out that hierarchy down to the component level. So that way they can start to know that, hey, I'm in this department, I'm looking for this specific piece of equipment. By using the hierarchy, they can find the right piece of equipment. You can also use it so that a requester or an operator may be able to write it at the process perspective, and then the technician, when they get in and troubleshoot and understand where the problem is, they can always drill that work order down into the specific component or machine center that was the problem. So that's the first way that it's good, is to be able to find the piece of equipment so that you can report on it effectively. The second thing is to understand where you're spending your money relative to the major process lines or departments that you're working in. So by organizing the equipment in a process line, not only am I getting an understanding of how much I'm spending on each machine center, but I can compare line 1 to line 2 to line 3 and understand whether or not one's giving me more trouble than the other.
Thanks, Dwayne. What are some of the biggest reasons for CMMS implementation failures?
One of them is probably being too aggressive on what you're trying to collect, and that's where, in the first tip the first or second tip that we gave about data, is to make sure that you don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I've seen a lot of implementations stall or take a lot longer than they should have because we were a little bit too focused on the detail that could have been acquired once we were up and running and had a better use of the application. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons. The second reason is that not understanding that you do have to dedicate time to do the implementation. It takes time. Again, it's something that we've had successfully, compressed down into a 1-week time frame to get people up and running, and then as they get more comfortable, we'll come back and take on more advanced features. But really, allocating the time. It's easy to write the check for the application, but you have to make sure you understand there is going to be a time component that you have for that.
And lastly, we have another great question. Does the Dude Solutions Implementation Coordinator help assure users get off on the right foot?
Yes, and that's one of the things that we try to do in our processes is make sure that once the client and customer has purchased the application, that we start a call for them to understand how they can be successful and what steps are part of that. And so that's probably one of the most important things, is to understand what lies ahead and how you can be successful, and then continually monitoring as you go through that process until you start to see the value of your implementation.
Okay, thank you so much, Dwayne. It looks like that was the final question. So your email here is up on the screen if anybody wants to reach out to Dwayne directly. Additionally, I just wanted to take a quick minute and mention our Dude University, which is coming up next year, April 30th to May 3rd in the Raleigh Convention Center right here in Raleigh, North Carolina. If you wanted to check out that link, it's a great way to network with other folks using our solutions. There's learning labs, there's great keynote speakers specifically focused on manufacturing. So please make sure to check that out. And thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you, Dwayne, for your expertise today.
Thank you.